Hello there! It's another episode of the CyberDudes podcast. I am still Robin Thornton and I'm joined by Omar Sangarima. As per usual, how are you doing, Omar?
Top of the morning to you, sir. Doing great. How about you?
See, breaking out your Irish roots there.
Jose hit you with the T at the end of his. He had a note to tell himself to talk about it. So I think we're gonna make that a thing.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, I'm all right, thank you. I've had a productive weekend. Been replacing very old, crappy drawer slides in the kitchen with some new fancy soft close stuff.
Ooh.
So that was it. Took me. I'll tell you what though, I did not think that was going to be so for just two drawers. Did not think that was going to be a 3 hour job. I swear the tagline for carpentry must be much harder than it looks.
No, it's carpenters. That's why Jesus was a carpenter, right? It took his divine handiwork there. My brother-in-law is a carpenter, and I'm always amazed at the stuff that he busts out and the projects you tell me about from time to time. I'm just like, it's the dark arts, bro. I don't got the patience for it.
But like I say, it was my table saw bench, which I did finish yesterday
Nice.
as well.
Sure.
Well, mostly it's got a couple of bits, but it was kind of a bit wonky, and it's perhaps just to do with partly cuts that are just ever so slightly out of alignment. But I find that's very, very difficult to get it everything absolutely, unless you're using like actual precision machinery to do all of that. And then and just the way that your timber just gradually changes and just moves things out of alignment.
Listen, I didn't know we were gonna get philosophical talking about our timber gradually changing over the years. This is a family show. If we could keep it PG, please. All right.
I don't know where you're thinking of going with that.
Hey,
Anyway,
hey.
moving on. Okay, well, aside from the news, we also have a longer form episode for you today. We have an interview with one of Omar's contacts and colleagues from the freelance world, Jose Toledo. Tell us a little bit about Jose. Well, if you would.
Jose is another one of those aliens out of the Air Force, and I'll leave it at that. Right, my Joe Rogan friends are gonna eat that up, as well as maybe some of the Blink 182 fans in the audience. Aliens are real. Aliens exist. He's they produce some pretty amazing signals intelligence folks, some great hackers, some great infosec people. So that's one aspect. He's a great teacher. That's the side gig that we both got linked up on, and just seeing him break down big, hard, chunky concepts into bite-sized morsels for getting people really. A lot of people talk about trying to transition people into cyber and being a gate buster, but I think Jose is one of those guys that actually walks the talk. So it's a privilege to be able to support him in that endeavor. And as an added bonus, he just happens to be a really cool guy. So,
yeah, it was my first time meeting him, and definitely the kind of guy you'd want to have a beer with.
Absolutely.
We will be having the discussion we had. So slightly later on, you will see Omar, not Omar. Well, we did. You did talk about this. We had the conversation. Jose will be opining.
We don't all look alike, all right? Like,
no,
cut it out, please. For God's sakes. All right, there's some variation in the background.
It's full names, dude. Just yeah. 2 syllables as well. Jose will be talking to us about his trajectory into a path into cybersecurity from the Air Force, and also discussing things like how to get the most out of people in the cyber realm, and actually even just in the kind of white collar office kind of world, really. But yeah, all of that coming up later. But first, shall we get into the news, Omar?
Let's do it.
Last week. Yep.
Let's do it.
Fire away.
First one is a juicy one, and we're not ones to shy away from controversial topics. So let's just dive into
never.
secret phone surveillance.
We don't like controversy.
Oh no, please take my eyes, but not controversy. Secret phone surveillance tech was likely deployed at the 2024 Democratic National Convention. Story by Wired. Our good friends there. They're probably one of the sources where I get closest to considering doing a subscription, and then I remember all information should be free, and I'm a pirate at heart, so bugger off with that stuff. I see another Britishism there, but
like it, love it.
Yeah, and this really brought to the forefront by another friend to the podcast. They might not know it yet, but they are deep in our hearts. The Electronic Frontier Foundation ran essentially not a sting operation, but they did the investigation of going, hey, let's take a look. And lo and behold, there were some dummy Wi-Fi posts, which is your first step in trying to gain an interdict person in the middle message, if you were, or a person in the middle attacks, right, of this type of nature. All you have to really do is set up a dummy Wi-Fi point that you control, that you want to have be your listening post, and off you go. It was a politically fraught time, and there's one of the things that I do like how Wired handled this story was there's a lot of potential who and why. There's not pointing at any, it must be the Republicans. No, like this is a controversial story, not because we're going to go party line, because, I can think of off the top like 5 or 10 different groups that would like to do this at this sort of gathering, especially considering that at the time there was a lot of Gaza protests going on as well. So you add another lovely set of potential players to the board that are really good at listening into people's messages. Shout out to our friends in Mossad and Unit 8200. So there's a bunch of different folks. Hey, listen, I want to be friends. All right, this Omar has no.
We don't want to be enemies, at least.
That's 100%, right? This Omar is cool with him. All right, I'll say this. So, but it's just goes to show you, right, Robin? Don't be jumping on to Wi-Fi that you don't 100% know where it came from.
I think this speaks to an awful lot too. Probably a lack of clear governance and organization from an IT perspective within not only the DNC but the RNC as well.
Yeah, please don't jump onto Wi-Fi that you don't know the source of. That's just basic hygiene 101 there. So tie that one off and head off to our good friends, another Chinese APT group, Advanced Persistent Threat Group, is ransacking Japan's secrets. This one coming to us from Dark Reading, another great source of cyber news. I like the name. It's not necessarily a typhoon. Mirror Face is a very, for some reason it's very Squid Gamesy to me. I know I'm mixing my Korea with my Japan and my China. Mirror Face just sounds to me like one of those guards in Squid Game. It's in a surprise to nobody. You have a Chinese APT group that is targeting its neighbors, and also, shocker, targeting its neighbors that usually side on the other side of the table from anywhere that China seems to be geopolitically. And this one's, I really picked this one because I knew you'd be jumping all over it. Phishing is the main threat vector for how they leverage this. That seems to always rear its ugly head everywhere.
Well, we'll get into that in a bit because I have something on that topic.
Yep. And listen, since 2019, Mirrorface has been going bananas and crafting well-crafted spear-phishing campaigns. So that tells me they know what they want. They go out and get it. They target it at very specific targets that they know are going to give them increased access to beautiful information that they want to get their grubby hands on. And away we go. I think this is just a geopolitical new normal.
There was you brought up a VW story as well, did you not?
Oh, yes. Well, this is kind of a bonus, I think, here. VW, and what's crazy to me is that VW, because it's one of those brands that owns a ton of other brands. There's been a lot of consolidation in the car market since it almost fell off a cliff a few years ago. There is a veritable metric shit ton is the official designation, my friend, of geolocation data based on where the hell your car likes to ping back to. And yes, if you don't quite get your head around the fact that your car, any really modern car, is now a computer that also pings back to whatever the hell you allow it to, unless you specifically shut it all down and periodically shut it down, because when they send updates, you have to do that shit all over again. I'm getting heated because I'm very glad I drive an 09 Honda CRV, that computer base. I don't even think it can run Doom. All right, and you can run Doom on everything, but this treasure trove of data, not only was it being sort of underhandedly collected, really not on Front Street, telling its folks, hey, we're getting this for you. That's rule number one that they broke. Number two, they put it in a pretty easily gettable database that researchers as well as nefarious parties are going, ooh, what is this? So there you have it, VW, egg on the face again. You have a metric ton of geolocation data on your drivers. Thanks.
There was a different story that I saw that kind of made me think of what I'm about to say. This has brought it up again, in that whenever you get companies been doing really big bad thing. Oh no, it was the Apple thing with Siri and the listening into stuff. And I mean, I'm sure that there are situations where these kinds of initiatives do sit at the very top of the hierarchy, where they've gone, yes, this is a good thing, let's go and do that, looking at you, Bezos. But there's so many situations with this where it's like, oh, big, like, massive company has been doing something incredibly egregious, and it's come out and it's a really bad thing, and it's really invasion of privacy type stuff. And I just look at them and I go, this is way too mundane of a thing that the highest level of, like, the board kind of knew about it and was actually pushing it, saying, yes, do this. I'm more inclined to think that in most cases, this is some senior manager or department head who has allowed this kind of, a data scientist has come to them and said, hey, we can do this and it'll be really good. And they've allowed it to happen for the purposes of leveraging insights that will allow them to make a name for themselves at the company. And because they're only focused on them and their career and what they can get out of it, they don't mandate any safeguards be done. Because the thing is as well, if you do this kind of thing and you actually do that sort of stuff properly from a security perspective, you have to declare it to other people. Yep. And then, and now security knows what you're doing, and then they can look at it from a legal perspective and get general counsel in and go, you shouldn't be doing this. So I'm always inclined to think that it's less big corporate malfeasance and more just self-interested senior manager.
I'll see that, and I'll understand it there, Robin. But at the end of the day, the buck stops at the board. It's sad that I'm going to say this, but I could see this coming out of the United States, and I wouldn't blink an eye. Sadly, it's technically not illegal. So why wouldn't you? You'd be stupid not to gather all the data that you can get Mokes to agree to give you. Mm-hmm. In order to, I think you're pointing out a really great point there. I don't want it to be buried. Is this data not necessarily for some cyberpunk, let's make sure we can control our population. They just want to be able to know where most of the cars are driven, where they can maybe target the sales to, all that beautiful stuff that's just, a 1990s marketer's wet dream that they could only, was misty, like a crazy idea in their eye. Now they can do it. They can target, now instead of anecdotally three months later knowing that a bunch of Subarus sell in the Northeast during bad weather, we can tell you by the week, and based on, snowfall, if it snows, we're going to sell 10 more. Let's run more ads or what have you.
exactly. My point is fundamentally, it's sexy and fun to imagine this is all some sort of big evil conspiracy, like corporate conspiracy, when in actual fact, for the most part, it's a lack of transparency at within the corporate structure. It is self-interested actions of people who work in, say, middle and senior management and that sort of stuff. And it is, like you say, people trying to make the most of the information that they can get and not considering the ramifications, because it's worth too much to them personally to use it. And it's a case of the road to hell was paved with good intentions.
Sure. And it's important enough to gather, but apparently it's not important enough to safeguard. That's the rub that I have. This probably wouldn't have even gotten out if they weren't such shit at protecting their databases to begin with. As crazy as it seems.
But that goes back to my point around people doing things off the books,
siloed,
slightly clandestinely, and not declaring it to the powers that could secure that stuff, because then legal gets wind of it and saying, actually, you can't do that.
We shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Good call.
So anyway, moving on. We went very deep in for this was a quick story sort of piece. Was that our 3 quick ones? Not so quick ones?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's good. And really piggybacking off of that, right, we're going full EU today.
Nice
EU
segue.
Data, trying to keep it a little smoother. There's 5 key trends here. First one being EU's Artificial Intelligence Act in action. I'm telling you, man, if I'm not going to get off the EU's jock for a long time, especially if they keep being so forward thinking with their regulations. They're one of the first bodies with any teeth to get in front of what the hell we're going to do from an AI perspective, governance wise.
Why don't you just get a hotel room with them?
Listen, if I love him so much, let me marry him, right? I'm showing my age there, but of course, right? And definitely not a hotel room with Pee Wee Herman, because he gets handsy. But you've seen this trend with just straight up GDPR, where that's the EU being very European with their thoughts on citizens actually deserve privacy rights. What's that going to amount to? And they've been finding the hell out of everybody. I don't think they find them enough. I think some of the people that they're trying to find make too much goddamn money. So what can you do? You don't want to set the fines unlimited, because then it could get crazy and deep six and things. But at the very least, they have a pattern of writing laws, doing some guidance and governance, and then enforcing it. So I hope and pray that the same thing happens with the Artificial Intelligence Act, because as I said, outside of the UN talking a big game, or outside of NIST, which I love that fact that there's a risk management strategy from NIST about AI, but it's not mandatory.
No.
Right? It's, please cross your heart and be a Boy Scout about it. This hopefully will see some enforcement of the AI Act from the EU. Coming up a quick second, Network and Information Security Directive, NIS2, matures a new era of cybersecurity regulation. NIS2 is, I consider it a big equivalent to like the NIST CSF on this side of the pond here. It's the maturity there. It's the same way you and I both lost our minds when CSF 2.0 came out. Same thing here in terms of tightening up certain directives. And again, with an eye towards more governance, they expanded. NIS2 did get a little deeper governance, gave more than a head nod towards AI as well, because for some reason, y'all Europeans actually like to coordinate efforts, it seems, which is crazy. It's a crazy concept here, because apparently every state has to do its own friggin' thing with data privacy. That's just
we can't lump me into that anymore, because we don't play nice.
I know, but even then, it's still there's whiffs and vapors still that carry over, which have you guys in a better spot than any of what's going on I think that may be States here.
I think there may be something to do with having Sparks altogether across 2 different periods, 9 years worth of 10 years worth of global conflict, is to say maybe we should start working together a little bit more, because that wasn't pleasant.
Maybe, who knows, right? Like if we could have another referendum, God willing, but who knows. Number 3, evolution of data transfers, a unified framework. The EU-US data privacy framework will, of course, keep on facing ongoing reviews. But again, the big takeaway I want our listeners to come away from is that there's been some big lines drawn in the sand in that area of the world regarding data privacy, and at least having some sort of semblance of standardization. And they're going to try to enforce it. So this is big if you're a US-based company and you want to get your hands on sweet European markets. You're going to have to come correcter, that's not a word, but whatever, than you do with your local data in the good old US of A. Coming up as a 4th point here, or you have some thoughts there on point number 3, or?
I mean, somewhat. I think it's one of those things where I think the presence of the EU stuff, things like the data privacy framework, things like GDPR, which you're about to mention. I know I've absolutely no doubt there are people probably, well, actually most certainly in the EU, but definitely here as well, because in the States, land of the freedom, and we kind of, there's many people who think that's complete unfettered freedom, that you should be able to do absolutely anything that you want. It's like, well, no, I mean, only within the realms of, not once it starts affecting other people, then they're not free, then are they?
No, listen, you're impining on my freedom if I can't impine on their freedom. How dare you?
Exactly, and that's the stupid thing. So the fact that this kind of stuff, it's good that they have to follow this, because it does prevent them from having their, as entities, as companies, having their own complete unfettered freedom at the expense of everybody else who now doesn't have that same privilege.
Absolutely. Speaking of which, right, and again, sometimes you just need one governing body to gather up the gumption and light the way. Expanding consumer rights under GDPR's influence, member nations of the EU are going to start taking a look at how to kind of tweak and adjust for their own internal citizens' data protection. One of the big sticking points, which I'm excited is even being discussed, is a right to explaining algorithmic decision making, which is a neat way to say, tell me how the fuck AI came to the decisions that it came to about XYZ. And now that has far-reaching effects in terms of credit rating, in terms of insurance potentially, in terms of getting healthcare coverage. There's a whole list of use cases where we're going towards algorithmic decision making, and if it's murky, it's dangerous. But we don't have laws covering that in the United States. There's a theme here, Robin, and I'm getting heated thinking about it. Like, this is nuts. But
I mean, there's something, that kind of thing as well, is that's just sensible. You don't have, I think, start that one again. I think some of the secrecy around the algorithms and that sort of stuff, and I'm just going to start, I'm going to use primarily the social media and which content to push and which not to, etc.
A very big topic.
I always feel like a lot of it is held back and not given the transparency that people would like, on the grounds of, oh, well, this is proprietary and we don't want anybody to know how to do it. And it's just kind of horseshit. There's so much more work that goes into that sort of stuff than simply just declaring, oh, well, we're going to push this, we're not going to show things that have this. For instance, YouTube, because we're battling with this right now on the channel, where there's watermarks of any description, none of that content gets showed. And okay, yeah, that makes sense, and you can definitely understand it when somebody points it out to you. It becomes much more clear and apparent. But it's really stupid that this kind of stuff isn't simply just declared, oh, if you do this, if you do this, if you do this, if you do this, your content won't be as successful. Have the platform declare that, rather than rely on frigging content creators to. And maybe this is part of it. Maybe there is some sort of like conspiracy around this, as to having, corporate conspiracies to having, oh, well, we'll keep all this obfuscated and stuff like that, because then it creates a great big niche for a whole bunch of content creators to create more content about, here's why all of your videos aren't coming out. But like, why the fuck should I have to go either trawling through somebody else's videos or sitting there looking at the data myself to try and tease out what rules are and aren't in place based on what's performing well and what's not, and what are the commonalities between that kind of content? Just fucking tell me.
Well, here's my counter argument. Well, not arguing, but here's what's even scarier to me, at least, is that sometimes, Robin, they can't tell you. They literally
because they don't know themselves.
Because they don't know themselves, and that's where we're running into being out over our skis with this type of technology. I'm usually not doom and gloom. Technology is my business, and business is good. I love it. But when you can't deconstruct a decision process because it's black boxed within its own AI, and you hand wave it, that's an issue.
Well, you've got a team of 1,000 developers and data scientists who haven't actually documented what the fuck they've been doing.
Absolutely. And to your point in an earlier story, maybe there's some sectarianism based on self-interest there. Who knows?
I know. But it doesn't make, it's just stupid. Like it doesn't help anybody but the people creating that content, for example, and also the platforms themselves. Everybody else is just going like, well, I'm just sort of flapping around in the dark, trying to just using trial and error to try and figure out what the hell works.
And you're starting to see with a lot of AI algorithms and a lot of standards, a deep division between those that are open and those that aren't. And one of the things that is touted as a competitive advantage for those that are open is the fact that here, you can look under the hood. But however, even on top of those types of platforms, you can magic it to the point where you don't know what happened there. So this is that type of technology where, again, when you have so many question marks, it's really great to see someone taking the lead with governance, or at least trying to. So I'll close this out here with the Digital Markets Act meets GDPR, privacy in the platform economy as the fifth big hot button prediction for 2025. The Digital Markets Act, now coming into its own fully in 2025, is really going to, this plus net neutrality going sideways is going to be a fun thing to see the convergence and the confluence of, the overlap between DMA and GDPR enforcement. It's going to challenge platforms to adapt their practices while balancing privacy obligations. Suddenly, in a lawless game, there's rules, and if the history of the Wild West is any indication, there's going to be a period of even increased lawlessness before it gets better, if it does. Let's see. Take it away, Robin. What's your story?
I had a plethora. First few, so this is what I had to choose from. So Chinese hackers double cyber attacks on Taiwan. Obviously, they want the territory. Big semiconductors. They contest that it is already and always has been theirs anyway. The Taiwanese would fiercely disagree. Now, we recall attacks against Ukraine from Russia ticked up quite a lot prior to the invasion. So I'm not making any predictions here, but I will have a surprise Pikachu face if we see the unfortunate play out of Chinese incursion into Taiwan in the next year or two. Absolutely don't want it, but will not be surprised.
Oh yeah.
Similarly, and I think this goes to the perceived scale of threat as well. The US are treating web and gaming giant Tencent, which is a Chinese company, with the same levels of caution, and we're not going to allow you to screw around in our borders the way that you are, as they did with TikTok, or are doing so with TikTok. The other ones, this is one that was I figured was absolutely ridiculous. From Bleeping Computer, Casio says that data of 8,500 people exposed in October ransomware attack. Number one, who cares? Number two, who is giving their data to Casio? Just buy the damn watch.
Listen.
And like buy the $10 watch, wear it for 15 years until it eventually runs out of battery, and that's it. Don't give them your personal data. You've no need to. This is ridiculous. Like, I don't even know why this was news. Like, okay, yeah, unfortunate for the people whose data was exposed, but I mean, to be fair, it actually involves business partner data and employee data. So there is kind of that, but there is some customer personal data that was in there. And I stress again, who the hell is giving their personal data as a customer of Casio? Who the hell is giving their personal data to Casio?
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense.
That's all.
But the one that I really want to go to is from Information Security Magazine. Phishing click rates triple in 2024.
Oh.
Not good. It's not good. And it's not good because phishing being the number one way that people get got, and it is the number one way that people get got because it's so effective. It will pretty much always be on the top of the list. To your point and persistent references to supply chain attacks, why focus all of those efforts on one very hard nut to crack when you can go after many small nuts who have access to the bigger nut, right?
After the reference to timber at the top of the call, I don't understand like where we went on this call, but I'm here for it. Timber and nuts.
Squirrels would be having a field day.
But I like that we're inclusive of big nuts and small nuts, right? We're not nut snobs.
No. Why? There was just no need. It was so innocent, and you just went.
No, come on now.
Anyway.
Big nuts.
Look, so this
can't not go in there. It's un-American. Come on.
Moving on. Well, not moving on. Just back to the story. So this is according to research from a cloud security services provider called Netscope. More than 8 out of every 1,000 users clicked on a phishing link each month in 2024. So, okay, yeah, it's 0.8%, but that's when you're talking about the world population, or at least the population that has access to the internet. It's a hell of a lot. There's billions of people. But that's up 190% compared to the prior year. Now, there's been an interesting kind of shift in how all of that has happened, in that most targeted or most impersonated are cloud service providers. So we're kind of talking in the realms of like OneDrive, for example, Microsoft's OneDrive, Office 365 login page, for example, most spoofed login page in the world at the moment. Why? Because it's so common. People are so familiar with it, and they don't necessarily. I would hazard most people couldn't tell me exactly, unless they've got some Rain Man level abilities, couldn't tell me exactly what it looks like. They just know roughly what it should look like, and that's how they kind of get got. This also plays into the fact that actually where these phishing links are getting to people has been shifting. Right? So it's been moving from email, which has traditionally been the delivery method, and now there are nearly 20% of them are actually web-based links off search results. And actually, this is highlighted in there's a different article on the same site talking about a PhishWP plugin, a WordPress plugin that is designed to mimic legitimate payment processors on WordPress pages, and so to collect one-time passwords and bypass multi-factor security measures, and also skim off payment details. But the way that this is being done is that you've got attackers finding vulnerable pages on, and again, cloud platforms like WordPress, which is a web page hosting platform, finding vulnerable accounts there, inserting these malicious plugins unbeknownst to the site owner, and then having this payment processor login page, or what looks like it at least, and people put in their login details, they trigger a one-time passcode, but when they put in that one-time passcode, it goes immediately to the attacker's to a Telegram account, so that they can then use that to log in. It's absolutely wild, but that's the nub of where it is. This phishing activity is moving from email, where people have been, like, by people like myself and you, warned for years and years and years, be careful of what email you're receiving, so people get very, very vigilant about that, or at least more so than they were. There's still people who are not vigilant at all, but people get more cautious about it, and so the attack method, the attack vector, changes to exploit a cognitive blind spot somewhere where people are less careful, which is on their search results. And I can understand completely why and how this is happening from the perspective of, we talked about it last week with email based phishing, and it was hard to spot, but there's various clues that you can go through, the thing like the actual sender address, the spelling, punctuation and grammar, etc. I think when you're on the web, it starts becoming much more, it's less, let's target these people with this thing that might interest them, and it ends up being a little bit more of a watering hole scenario. So you can't rely on that, oh, is it unsolicited, because you're actually searching for the information yourself anyway. You're searching for the service yourself, so you kind of have a little bit more reason to trust it, because you've got vested interest in navigating through to those links and using the functionality that's on those sites. So there's less to spot. I think this is going to be much more of a problem, and I think the onus really then falls back to the platform providers and the site owners to make sure that their shit is locked down. Otherwise, you're going to be opening up an awful lot more people to a lot of cyber risk. And that's my piece on there. Unfortunately, I don't have any sage advice.
No, it's a shift that's going to take, I think, some re-education, right? Because it's shifting to another arena, and it's sadly, for nefarious purposes, it's following those two beautiful tenets of how to get people to adopt technology. Is it easy? And does it do a job that they're looking to be done? Does it help them do something that they're looking to do? It hits those two immediately, especially on a search. They're looking for that info. So, oh yeah, sure.
I think the big piece of advice that, at least for you common person, is going to have to start to be, no matter what it is you are doing online, and no matter how much of a rush you are in, slow down. Really look at stuff. And consider whether it is worth it, and layer in other aspects of how to protect yourself. We've talked about the credit card versus debit card thing before. We've talked about different passwords for different stuff, for example. That kind of thing is going to be all the more relevant, useful, and necessary if you are increasingly unable to spot the attack before you're actually in the process of falling for it.
Sure.
Good. So that's for the news. Let us then move on to our feature segment here. And that was a protracted news segment as well, so we might do some cutting down for a shorter version for this episode, and then publish a long news format as well. But we will go into our interview with Jose now. So we will see you on the other side.
I'm very excited. Welcome everyone. CyberDudes feature. Finally, we've stopped being lazy and are putting a longer form one together. And I'm excited for this one, folks, and y'all should be too, because we have an absolute badass motherfucker on with us. Jose Toledo is one of those rare aliens, in my opinion. I don't know what they do with these cats in the Air Force. They just grow them different. They feed them different water. Maybe it's some of that Roswell shit that, they haven't told the rest of us about, but whatever it is, just an absolute inspirational gentleman, linked up. I'll let him get into, the whys and the what fors, but, he's just been someone I've been privileged to know for quite a few years now. We were talking about that before we flipped on the record button. We teach together for Full Stack Academy or Simply Learn or whoever owns them these next 10 minutes here. And just been great to see him, how he connects with students, and he's made me raise my game of understanding things I thought I knew about. Once I heard him explain, I said, nah, I got to carve out some time this weekend and relearn XYZ because I didn't know it as well as I thought I did. So Jose, absolutely stoked to have you with us. Please let us know a little bit. Anything I didn't cover, let us know.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Jose Toledo, kind of a all around cybersecurity guy, man. I got my start in, networking and kind of working in cybersecurity, and I'm kind of doing the fake it till I make it thing at Google right now, and gonna just see how things like keep going for me. It's been a good time. It's been a good ride. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this, man. This is a good time. I won't say too much in case there are questions that are going to cover this, but if you want more of a long form introduction, I could do that too.
I just wonder. I wonder what make it what constitutes make it, right? you're at Google.
I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out.
Like what? Like I'm gonna do cyber for Mars. Hold on, for Elon. No, just I'm gonna do the cyber on Mars. Just me. Gonna be the person dialing it all in. No, I think we could pop it off. Robin, what do you got? What how do you want to pick his brain here? How do you want to kick things off?
Oh God, I don't know. So network. I feel like that's the networking and then into cyber is kind of one of those what everybody considers like to be the sort of traditional route. I guess what made you flip from the networking side to cybersecurity? Did it just seem like a natural progression?
No, man, I'll say it's kind of interesting for me. It was never an intentional move, and I think by the time I realized I was there, it was kind of like, whoa, this is a thing. Like this is a job. I specifically remember one day somebody was like, hey man, how do you like being an infosec? And I was like, it was the first time I'd heard somebody say infosec, and I was like, I mean. To me, it's just like all the same thing, right? And so I was a young guy, didn't have like much computer access, right? It was like talking big white towers, big white CRT monitors. Like I used to like show up really early to go to school to like hang out in the computer lab because we had this like super cool teacher who would just like show up like 45 minutes early and just let kids go in and like mess around with computers. And it was just like a general love of technology. Like that's probably dumb, right? Like, I mean, I was dumb. Like, I'd be that guy, like, in the days of XP where you're, like, downloading the theme packs because you're, like, think it looks cool to have, like, an FBI background when your computer turns on. And then, like, I'm tinkering with a computer and, like, a Comcast guy or something comes over and he's like, I don't want to touch this computer. I don't know what's going on here. And so he, like, leaves. And so it was kind of, like, constantly falling into things that just happened, right? And so, this being professionally, I'm almost at probably at around 11 years in the industry between the two of them. And then before that, I was tinkering for 5 or 6 years with anyone who would let me, and for a long time, I didn't have my own computer. So it was always kind of just like learn what anybody will throw my direction. And then the talk about cybersecurity kind of just happened, right? And then it was kind of like, I was managing, like server rooms, data centers type deals. Virtualization was my thing. I was building home labs. If it was like a nerdy thing, like I wanted to be involved in it as much as I could. I was like helping our networking guys like rack and stack switches and like break switches, never like actually implement like, but just break like new Cisco switches or Avaya switches or, um, yeah, it was cool, right? And so it was kind of just the Air Force. I got lucky. I was on a deployment to Eastern Europe, and I was like, fortunate to be around some really good people. And they were like, "Hey, man, you interested in flying in the backseat of a fighter jet?" And I was like, "Yeah, dude, that's cool." And they were like, "Okay, cool. You want to do it in like 3 days?" And I was like,
Hold on a minute. What'd they put you in?
"An F-15C."
I knew it was going to be 15.
D
Oh,
model,
those things are
sorry,
so
D
freaking
model,
cool.
two-seater.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so they put me in the backseat of a D model. Dude, it was like, right, it ends. And then like I remember the pilot who this guy named Trap, he's I feel comfortable saying his name because he's like credited at the end of like Captain Marvel as like
Oh, damn.
as an advisor. He's a super good
Okay.
guy. He's like, "Dude, how was it?" And I was like, "Dude, this is awesome. I didn't know like this was a thing." And I was like, "I sucks. I'm just into computers." And he was like, "Hey, we need a cybersecurity guy if you want to come work here. It's brand new." And I was like, "Dude, what do I do?" And he was like, "Here's a job application." And so I just like kind of came back from this deployment and I was like InfoSec.
Yeah.
And I just didn't know what I was doing, right? It was like just staring at logs.
Yeah.
So
So
I like
See, they're thinking like, "Hey, Ma, I just have I had a ride in the backseat of a fighter jet, and now I'm going to be doing security for like F-15 telemetry. Like, yay!" And then, oh, this is less exciting than it actually sounds.
yeah, man, I think that's what it was. It was a lot less exciting than I thought it was going to be. It was cool to be around the environment. I'm a huge like aviation geek too, so it was awesome to like kind of mix my two passions for a long time. And then honestly, like it kind of just kicked off from there, right? Like between being in the military, being a defense contractor, eventually leaving to go private sector, like full private sector, and kind of where I'm at now. That was a long-winded way of saying how did I go from networking to cybersecurity? It was never a choice, I think, which I'm blessed for, right? It was great.
I mean, it's boring if there's no good story behind it, right? And honestly, I think like, getting your eyeballs pushed to the back of your head by someone throwing down the throttle on an F-15 is that's a pretty cool way of saying,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is kind of how I did it."
Yeah.
I don't feel like that's going to be all that much help to other people going like, "How do I get into cyber?" Like, "Oh, well, go hitch a ride in the back of a jet."
Highly illegal, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's going to be hella illegal. But that's where I was going to pivot. So somebody rolls up to you today, Jose, and you can't tell them that. Say that's not on the table, right? Or hey, you're not going to trump my story, so let's just put it on the side table here. What would you throw at them, today in terms of how to break in or start to break in or get adjacent to it, what have you?
Yeah, absolutely. In my opinion, this is a question I get a lot, right? Between instructing with you, Omar, and just kind of like the general, you kind of get the general like, "Oh, you work for X company?" Like, dude, how do I do that? And I kind of never know the answer, like the proper answer, I think. But the general guidance that I'll give people is the way that I was like brought up in networking is the way that I tell people to like try to come up in cybersecurity, right? So when I was in cybersecurity, so like starting off, so much of it was self-taught, right? I was like listening to YouTube videos with like instructions that never made sense, or like I prioritized watching stuff with like cool moving text in the background because I thought that was cool, and it like learned nothing from it, wasted like 3 years of my life. The biggest thing I tell people is the foundational knowledge is the key, right? And so I kind of take two stances on this. I'm not going to be the guy who like, I'm not going to be Paul Revere who like rides around on a horse and he's like, we need cyber, because like it is a tough industry to get into, right? I'm not going to run around waking everybody up saying come to cyber, there's money, like we have cookies. But on the other hand, I will tell people that I am a true believer that there are positions that are just absolutely something you can jump into if you have the right opportunity, right? And so I'll start with saying the number one thing I tell people is foundational knowledge is key. I used to have my first supervisor, kind of like my first mentor. We had kind of like a head clashing for a long time. Super nice guy. He's like, you know, gone for retired from the industry for a while.
I was gonna ask,
His
well,
whole
gone
thing.
meaning like dead? Okay, like
Oh no,
passed
no,
on.
retired. He's retired.
Like, well, you
But
said
I
you
was
butted
like,
heads, and then now he's dead. I was like, Jose, this is recorded. Like, let's not.
yeah, man. No, it's yeah, he retired, and one of the things I think about frequently is I didn't appreciate the guy when I had him around, right? In fact, I really didn't get along with him for such a long time because I felt like he was just so hard about things. But there was a skill that I tell people is something you should learn, right? And it's when you are learning something, right? You should be able to take whatever concept you're learning and explain it to your mom if they're not technologically literate, or your dad, or whoever family member, your significant other, whoever it is that you have in your life around you, or anybody who will listen, is what he would also say. And so it was like a thing that I actively practiced, right? I would learn a concept, I would have to get qualified in this concept. And the only way he would qualify me, even though I just had to demonstrate competency, was he would send me down the hall to a very nice lady I used to work with who wanted to understand technology but couldn't because it just wasn't her specialty. And he would say, "Hey, X, he wants to explain something to you." And she would put her glasses down and she'd close her book and then she would listen.
Oh
And
shit!
she would either like thumbs up or thumbs down me. And dude, this was my life for probably 2 years. Like
I've never
constant
heard this story.
defeat.
It's amazing.
Yeah, dude, this was like constant defeat. And so that's why, like, if Omar's heard me teach, right? But if I'm talking to people, if I'm trying to teach something to somebody, I will go down the path of do this. The way you can remember this is like with this weird statement or like infusing the same joke every time I say this one thing. And it's to get that, like, for me, the foundational concepts make sense. And that's what's important. I'll say the kind of like secondary thing is to make sure you're specializing in the future. As like dumb as that sounds, right? Like I was at a work conference a couple months back, and one of the guys was like, "It's not a talk if somebody doesn't say AI, right?" And so this isn't about AI, but it's about the future of whatever technology is, right? And so it's that cybersecurity isn't a one size fits all, right? Like it's not you're a hacker, you're a blue teamer, you're a SOC analyst, you're like it's not one size fits all. Like I still find people where I'm like, wow, I didn't even know that was like a job you could do. But if an organization wants it, so like find a niche, right? Because it's not one size fits all. Excuse me. And I would say that those are like the two biggest things that I tell people is like understand the foundational knowledge and find something like future proof, which is tough, right? To just understand. And whether that's the big thing I push on people is like embracing artificial intelligence. If I can continue my rant here for a second, we had a story. I had a incident response exercise for FEMA Region 9, which is like 5 or 6 states on the West Coast. That was a live incident response that simulated an attack on critical infrastructure for the region, right? And so for me, it was California because that's where I am. And we have a team, and traditionally we'll take about half the team who has like zero experience. I'm talking like people who like traditionally work on radios or like things like that. This is a great proving ground to find out if these people, like if it's something they actually like, right? Just throw them into the fire. And so we had a young lady who was on our team, and we were like, "What do you want to do?" And she was like, "I don't know. I looked this up on Google last night, and I think it's good." And it was running a sim, right? And so I was like, "Oh, cool." Dude, we just like let her run for like 6 hours, and it's just like, let's see. The first day is slow, right? You're just kind of like looking for Easter eggs. And dude, we do our check-in with her after 6 hours, and she has got this like body of evidence of things that she believes is suspicious, totally based off of ChatGPT, right? And she literally had like ChatGPT open on one side, like the sim open in the center, like 2/3 of her screen, and then like her notes, like her Google Docs, and she was just like screenshot, copy, paste. And then she was like, "I'm not experienced enough to interpret any of this. I'm going to pass this off to someone more senior." And we had a guy who would look at it and he'd be like, half of this doesn't matter, but the other half of it is like really good findings, which is killer given that 6 hours prior, she didn't know what a sim was.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean when I'm saying like specialize in the future, right? Like I'm not gonna lie. When I first heard about ChatGPT, I was like at work, and one of my like coworkers who's kind of like is like all about what's hip brought it up, and I was like, all right, man, like cool.
Let's see.
Like you can chat with a smart Google, and then it like took off, dude. For like 2 months I was behind the curve. I just didn't care about it. I was like, dude, I've got too much going on at work. And then eventually I was like, wow, this is amazing. And so now I preach right now. That's kind of like the thing of the future. Even if it's not what you're going to be good at, use it to teach yourself. So
I think it's quite a good teaching tool as well if you take it with a grain of salt. You know, like really embrace the fact that it makes shit up. It gets things wrong. It sometimes completely disregards the instructions that you've given it.
Yeah.
Like a person, right? But it will kind of give you, for a lot of things, it will give you sort of 70-80% of it. And then it's up to you to call bullshit or find out where the inconsistencies are and like do it that way. And that's, I mean, honestly, I'd not necessarily thought about this before you actually started saying the stuff with the girl who was doing the sim bit. But it's being able to question that stuff is a really foundational part of learning. Like, why is this the way that it is? How does this work? Like convincing yourself convincing yourself that the logic is sound, and where it's not, knowing what to question and saying, why is this, why that? And then for ChatGPT purposes or LLM purposes, where has it got it wrong? Where is it fucked up?
Yeah. I would say that's one of the biggest things I'm glad you brought that up. It's one of the biggest things I'll encourage people to do is like, I kind of tell it the way I tell people the way I say I deal with people, which is like trust but verify, right? Like I just take everything at face value and like question the hell out of everything. I read a book recently by Salman Khan called Brave New Worlds. And so Salman Khan is the guy who created Khan Academy. And so I didn't know the history behind it, but like long story short, the guy was reached out to by Sam Altman and was like, hey, we want to test, like Bill Gates said, if we can pass the AP biology test, he'll give us a ton of money. And they couldn't pass it to like save their lives. And so like, we want to use your question repository. And he was like, this is kind of like cool, but like it's not smart enough. So they trained it some more. They come back. And so like it's him talking about how we learn as people, but also like him giving it to children and saying like, here, how can you learn? And it talks about a lot of the ethical dilemmas that you have with giving it to children, and like, does it reduce their creativity, and like, should schools use it or should they ban it? And so I think it's crazy, right? Like anybody who's like currently in the military and they probably hear this what I'm about to say, they're gonna like cringe, but there's this term in the military called the force multiplier, right? It's kind of like a hot buzzword right now. I'm not a fan of buzzwords. I'm gonna get in trouble for this if somebody sees it, and that's fine. But like in this situation, I 100% believe that a force multiplier is something like ChatGPT, right? Because like even if I don't have somebody who can question it, if they're super patient and they're just willing to like let me scan through something, you've already sifted through a lot of stuff that I didn't have to look at to begin with. Where it sucks is like if somebody, like you said, takes everything and says, I've got a ton of bad things happening. But really, it's not. That's where it starts to be an impediment, right? So I don't know. I'm not 100% in, but I'm a fan.
I think, this is where I land with it, because I do notice it has peaks and troughs of ability. Like my usage of it the last week or two has been particularly frustrating because it has been outright ignoring my instructions, whereas like a month or two ago it was like, this is great, it's doing everything exactly as I ask. And so I don't know, it's sort of like mildly sort of, I don't know, it's as if it's got like multiple personality disorder with very, very different IQs. But it's a really good shortcut tool for, like, for instance, if you've got a massive document and say, all right, skim through this. Give me the sort of headline bits. Tell me where to focus my attention, and then do it that way. I completely understand the concerns with like teaching, basically kids using it to do their homework and stuff like that, because, and we said this, Omar, with Andy like a few months ago, it's like there's the very real risk that, and this is particularly dangerous with sort of security, there's a very real risk that we end up with an entire generation that just has only black box understanding of the technology. Like, this goes in, that comes out. What happens under the hood? I don't know. I never learned it because I never had to, because everything all did it for me. It's one of those weird things where you probably end up getting a progressively concentrated cohort of ability or intellect within a very small strata of society, and if nobody else learns it, then that will never, that will dwindle, and then we're screwed, right?
Yeah, I had somebody make a reference to me the other day, not to be religious, right? But it was like, they're like, historically, it's like the people who had to have the Bible read to them, right? Like, you were just trusting that the things that were being taught to you and told to you because you had no knowledge were just true. And I think that's kind of like where I kind of get on a soapbox with people again, right? I love when I meet people who are like, I want to get in cyber, dude. How do I do it? And I'm like, oh, cool. What are you doing? And they're like, oh, dude, I'm following these tutorials. I'm doing all the right things, right? Like, I just watch like all these cool YouTube series, right? Like IPSec, and I just follow along. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, but are you doing anything on your own? Like, are you going for hands-on experience? It's like one of my hobbies for a long time, and it's something like I still kind of dabble in, is like, so I probably like software engineering, right? Like, mobile application development. And so it's like, it's been nice to like get back into it every so often when I get stuck, because I'll just kind of like, hey, ChatGPT or Gemini or whoever, what do you think of this thing that doesn't work? And it's like, you are stupid. You just need to change this one line. Welcome to the future, old man. The future's now. Like, yeah. And so I tell people all the time, right? Like, continuous learning and hands-on experience is like what's gonna make or break you. Like, if I had to pick between two people, like the guy who's got all the education and can talk about all the things, or the guy who like is pretty self-taught but has a portfolio of things that he can show to me, and he's just curious, like, he or she can start a conversation about something, and then they can say, well, I don't know enough about that, but I'm really interested in that. Give me time, right? Those are the people, in my opinion, they make it in the industry, right? Like, those are the people who want to get there. And that's kind of like my irritation with cybersecurity with a lot of people, is like, they see like the average amount of money that people make, and they're like, that's awesome. Like, I want to do that. And you're like, oh, sometimes my life sucks, right? Like, you know how much it sucks to talk to a company who's been ransomwared? Like, it's not fun being the guy in the room. Like, it's not fun being the guy who's taking an entire organization through like an overhaul of their records management system because they have no data classification or something along those lines, right? It sucks. But at the end of the day, like, you just do it because you're like, this is kind of cool, man. Like, when this all works, like, nobody's gonna know who I am. This is awesome. Like things just work because people do great work, right? So, excuse me. So, yeah, that curiosity and that hands-on experience, man, it's worth more than its weight in gold.
I
But I don't know.
I always hear, and we talked about this, Jose, where if somebody hits me with, I like puzzles, right? At the other end of at the other side of a hiring table, or if they come across that way, that's the person that I want to sit down and talk to, right?
Oh yeah.
Because like that need to know, that drive of, like almost a physical aversion to not knowing the answer is probably one of the most salient driving forces for being successful, I would imagine, in many industries, but absolutely in cyber. Right?
Yeah. It's interesting. You get like a certain personality type that like wants to come into the industry, And generally, right, you find the people who are puzzled, like whatever your like thing to catch onto is, you're like, do this, right, and like get really good at it, but also keep talking to me, right, because like one of like I mean, you two probably know, right? Like, soft skills, man, like talk to me about what you've learned, talk to me about like what you're stuck on, talk to me about like these opinions that you're developing, because all too often you meet people just like in any industry who like follow a single source of truth in their head, right? Like a single news source basically, but for like learning. And then they're just like, you get the people who are like OSCP stands, right? They're like OSCP or die. Like you're useless. Like you're not a pen tester unless you have OSCP, right? And like that's something I've kind of like always worked in and out of, and like it's something I don't have the opportunity to do as much of right now in my current role, but it's like something I keep up with consistently. And man, I can't tell you how often I get the, oh cool, like let's have this good conversation about offensive security or some new CVE or something along those lines. And somebody's like, oh cool, you know, and then they find out like, oh, you don't have an OSCP, or like you don't have a CISP, like okay, like do you really know what you're talking about? And I'm like, man, like I know some great practitioners whose names are like non-existent in the public, but they do great work for society. And you're like, these guys don't have OSCP. Like these guys aren't OSCEs. Like
they're just tinkerers, and they break stuff and they build it back better.
Exactly.
And it's the support system for most of the technology we use today. Like it's just wild. I'm thinking for some reason, Steve Sims, is it? Have you heard of this guy? And it's funny because I didn't know that he was in the industry until I was watching like Soft White Underbelly, right? Another like a YouTube series that I love watching. Like this guy interviews all sorts of people, like gangsters, drug addicts, and like but the way he handles the interviews is just pretty awesome. And this one dude was on there. And like, I think I looked him up on LinkedIn and it said, you know, program manager at private. And I'm like, okay, I'm the first indicator of like, you know, and then I looked him up. Like you said, he was kind of like, you know, a very low key sort of cat, but the way he was talking about stuff, I'm like, oh, this guy folks, like, you know, that this guy definitely does what, you know, knows the game, and, you know, started and just, but very unassuming. Right, you know, his pastime is, you know, he's also like in a rock band, right? So he had that sort of look to him, but just an absolute beast. I don't know if he has an OSCP. It also doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
It's interesting. I'll say that we're very unique in that sense as an industry, because there aren't very many industries you can get into where you can like throw a couple letters behind your name for something you studied for 3 months and like call yourself, you know, like a VCISO or something, and you're like, wait a second, I'm looking at like your LinkedIn work history, like you worked at a Starbucks 2 years ago. Like nothing against Starbucks, man, but I'm very confused.
I'm willing to bet you. Yeah, I'm willing to bet you weren't hacking your point of sale terminal every single day.
Listen, you know, maybe.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe they were doing the stuff that everybody seems to be abusing McDonald's with now. The API stuff to get free grub. That's the latest thing I'm seeing on the YouTubes here. But one of the things I wanted to kick it back to, because I'm interested in it, something that made you raise your eyebrow. You mentioned, hey, I didn't even know that was a job. What's a cool niche that you've come across where you were like, wait a second, that's the thing?
For a long time, even like having experience like pen testing, the really interesting part to me was the people who do like the human aspect of it, right? Which is very public right now. But I feel like there are still a ton of people who don't realize it, right? There are like physical pen tests. There are
it's amazing the number of places that you can get with a clipboard and a high-vis jacket and a hard hat.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. One of the things that's been like really big for me lately, and like that I've been to like a couple like talks about, and like there's some really cool technology, right? That's public, that you can take YouTube videos or voice feeds from and train it to speak like a person. And so I've seen demos where people will do this, train it to speak like a specific person, and then use that like as a new method of entry. Like gone are the days where you're like, gone are the days where you're like, hey, like I'm the CEO, new guy. I need you to send me $50 Starbucks gift cards or iTunes gift cards right now. Don't tell anybody. Just take the card on the desk and go. Right? Like now it's like, oh, I can sound like somebody and fool a family member over the phone.
Yeah.
And like that's one of the interesting things to me is the people who like you're like, oh, you don't have a ton of cybersecurity experience, but in at least like the places I've worked, that is truly cybersecurity, right? Like that's your initial vector of entry in some places. Because like we look at how phishing has been such a huge thing that's like constantly riddled people, and then technology has started to keep up with it, right? We have stuff like Proofpoint and Know4 and technologies like that that are getting really, really good at catching phishing, and it makes the offensive engineer's job extremely hard because now you're like, okay, I just threw away domains I've been grooming for 4 weeks. I got to start from scratch because I made a mistake, or like somebody accidentally reported me as spam or whatever it is, or Proofpoint caught me when I thought they wouldn't. Where now it's just a game of, okay, well, I've got a clip of a person that sounds like a CEO or someone's boss. I'm just going to start calling people and saying, hey, there's this new upgrade. I need you to like go to this link and like download it. I'm with the vendor right now. We need to make sure it works. And like you're creating the sense of urgency, right? And it's like, oh, okay, well, we were popped. Because the guy's like, okay, cool, thanks, sir, thanks, ma'am, and then they hang up the phone and then they don't talk about it again.
And that's it's a really funny one because it's almost as if things have gone kind of full circle. Before all the technology came along, it was all confidence tricks anyway. But I guess really, unless you're in a kind of corporate setting, the notion that behind any business or underpinning any business is 3 pillars: people, process, and technology. Do you have to be technically proficient to hack people and process? Absolutely not. You'd be a good people person to hack people, and arguably in many ways it's much easier so long as you're ballsy enough and have a reasonably good poker face, because like the difference between hacking a person and a computer doesn't give a shit whether you like it or not. People care whether you like them or not, so they will do things to please in order to not seem like a shit person. So it's and that's where like we come into, because I'm not a technically proficient cyber individual. I work on the human side, and that's one of those areas where, for instance, when you're saying about getting into the industry, and what do you need? Do you need all the technical skills, or do you need all the foundational knowledge? Not even all the foundational knowledge. Like the kind of role that I'm in, you can jump into that sort of thing with an amount. You need to know kind of like how cyber works, but the real devil in the detail for that thing is like the nuance that goes with all the scenarios, as opposed to actually knowing what is black and white, right or wrong.
One of the interesting things to me about the different like jobs is it's kind of like other things, right? Where networking is a really big part of it. And so for perspective, right, like that's how I got in. But like a thing you'll see commonly in the military is just you want what you said, right? Someone with like good values and can find the devil in the details. And then you're like, okay, cool. Like I want to see how much you really want to do this. Have fun staring at raw logs for 6 months, right? Like I have a young cousin. He's like just turned like 20, and he's trying to he's breaking in, right? And so he's in the military, but has like a very IT focused job, and he's like doing everything he can, like taking every opportunity. And people are like, oh, you're just a good guy who like maybe you're a little misguided sometimes because you watch too much YouTube, but yeah, absolutely. Like you have enough, enough terms that like can make you dangerous, right? Sure. And we talk about like people in GRC, like GRC, like governance, risk, and compliance, is a very, very important part of cybersecurity. Um, and a lot of people, it's like something you don't talk about very often, right? Because it's not like sexy that like to some people, but you're like, man, I don't think you understand if you say the words like SOC to a company or like GLBA, like the people's ears pucker, like they like point out, you're like, whoa, what's going on here? And it's like, oh, these people come in and they run the room, right? Like, the bean counters run the room, right? And so it's like the people who like manage the money, the people who like manage the processes, like they're probably the last person who has to sign off on this really cool technology that you want to implement, because they're going to have to be the ones to do due diligence on the organization. And so, yeah, it's that what that foundational knowledge is, right, is just up to you to figure out what that niche is going to be, and I'd say don't put yourself in a box. That's probably the worst part, right? Like people are like, I'm going to be a pen tester. And you're like, well, there's not necessarily like a linear path to being a pen tester sometimes. Sometimes you've got to like do everything else before somebody's like, hey, dude or dudette, like, I think you're good at this, right? It's kind of like how I got into consulting. I was a defense contractor working in cybersecurity, and I was applying to like low-level cybersecurity jobs. And I had a recruiter for a company reach out to me, and they were like, hey, we don't think you're a good fit for this role, but we think you're a really good fit to be a consultant, like at an upper level. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, but can you interview tomorrow? And I was like, sure. And so I interviewed, and they were like, dude, you know enough of like all the little things that we want you to talk about, and you can explain it to somebody that's not in the industry. Welcome. Like, we'll teach you everything else we need to teach you. And that was like, I was there for like 2 years, right? And that was like my segue into what I do now. And so it was just kind of just wanting to like learn, wanting to be the guy who like, I want to be a subject matter expert at something always, right? Like that's the goal.
Yeah.
But I also want to be the guy who can like be in enough conversations that I can listen in to like really smart dudes and dudettes talk. And I'm just like, wow, you guys are crazy smart. Like you guys are doing cool work.
Yeah.
And then take a bunch of notes. Like I keep like a notepad, like everywhere I go, like I keep a notepad, and it's like full of random things that I've like learned or like I've heard people say. And I'm like sitting down, and I get the knock on the office door sometimes, and it's like, hey, you come to bed? And I'm like, in 2 hours. I'm in a rabbit hole right now. I'm in a rabbit hole. But yeah, it's a good point.
I've always thought that I mean, I started off in consultancy as well, like straight out of university, and it was basically the hiring mantra at where I started off was the same kind of thing. They called it hire for attitude, because it was like, we can teach you everything technical and everything, sort of, I guess you call it like business academic that you would need to know. We cannot. It's much harder to teach you how to be a decent, curious person who knows how to work with people and be congenial. And I think that sometimes, I mean, I wouldn't say that I encounter it day to day, because Omar and I work with some absolute champion people, but it's easy enough to see when you're looking online, like things like Reddit threads and stuff like that, in the way that people communicate across. Like, some of these guys are assholes, and like some of them, and there's especially on the very, very technical side, like the SOC side, there's such a strong contempt for the end user, because it's like, oh, all these people are idiots. It's like, no, they're not idiots. They're just good in areas that, they're just not good in the area that you are exceptional, and they're probably exceptional in an area that you don't know anything about. They would think you're an idiot trying to do their job, right? So, and it's kind of one of those things, is like, does anyone ever tell people like, yeah, you might be really good at what you do, but you're gonna struggle to get very far acting like an arsehole every day?
I would say that's one of those interesting ones, right? Like, kind of go back to the soft skills. I remember first introducing my wife before, like back when she was my girlfriend, to like a bunch of my coworkers. And I remember I've worked with some interesting guys before, right? And you always do, but a lot of those personality types, the like The things that are you're good at are not things other people prioritize, right? And like I remember her initial reaction after like the first meeting with a bunch of my old coworkers. She was like, "How much did you say that guy makes? Like that guy? How can he have conversations with people?" Like it was just she came from a teaching background and like science, so like being correct matters. Like the words you say matter, and so she's just like, "Your industry is like the Wild West, man." And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah, it is.
honestly, like I think
Yeah,
it
it
is because it's just how things go. And unfortunately, I think that's the other issue I've had. You know, Omar actually brought this up to me before. He and I had a conversation about this probably about a year ago when I was like starting the interview for my current job. Um, I told him like one of the biggest things I had an issue with was some people told me that I was too direct. Right. Like I was the guy who like if I worked with somebody who I thought was an asshole, I'd be like, "Hey dude, I think you're kind of an asshole. Like you should stop." And
Mhm.
people would be like, "You can't do that." And I'm like, why can't I do that? Like he just called me stupid. And Omar was like, "No, dude." Like he talked to me about Andy, right? And like some of the guys you work with, and it's just like, no, some of these guys just say it like it is, and like people aren't gonna like you, and like you just need to say it. And like it's important to recognize that sometimes you might sound like one of those guys because you're just telling people they suck. Um, and I think Silicon Valley, like the Fang Mang type companies, like I think they're doing a pretty good job with like delineating that, right? Like you can go like a technical track and like make as much as like a director, L7, L8, whatever organization you're in, and like never manage people, or you can be the guy or gal who becomes a manager and leaves the technical background you have. And so I think that that's probably a good place where it's at. I think the military, like some branches of the military handle it well. They have like technical subject matter experts who like make more money, but they don't manage people. But it's an issue, right? Like the soft skills are a thing. I have 100% been the guy who was leaving a job who my manager was like, "Hey, you happen to have anybody you'd recommend to replace you?" And I'm like, "I know a guy, but you got to give him a chance. Like his interview is going to be great because he's going to be a really nice guy and he's going to talk to you about your wife and kids and he's going to talk to you about everything, but his like levels cyber-wise are really low." One of my greatest mentors in consulting is I forget, he's going to get named. His name's Santosh, right? He's this like this big jovial Canadian guy who is just like the nicest guy in the world. And he made the switch from being like an engineer, like an industrial engineer to like, I just want to try cybersecurity because I think it's cool. And everybody gave this guy a chance because he was the nicest guy in the world. Santosh and I had the opportunity to literally travel the world and perform assessments everywhere. And I remember the biggest thing that he taught me, I remember like stressing out because I was like working with people who I never thought I'd work with, right? Like high up people. And he was like, "Look, man, like you take care of your clients, everything else will fall into place. Just be a good guy." And like that was the thing he constantly like would put into my head. Like I'd be up late at night in the middle of an assessment because I was like unprepared for the next day. I was like, I did not know that this was going to be something we had to talk about. And he was like, "Dude, we're going to show up tomorrow. We're going to shake everybody's hands. I know the names of everybody's kids. Like these people aren't here to like to beat us. Like we're here to help them. And it's just a matter of like being good people." And this guy, man, like the amount of times he'd be in a situation where he was like, "Hey, you know, like I'm an engineer. That's a technology I'm not familiar with." He'd be like, "I'm gonna get back to you. I'll tell you what." Like, and he absolutely, it was that nice follow-up email. The guy was like,
Yeah.
he was just the guy who always knew what to say. And I was like, man, I don't consider myself an extrovert. I consider myself like a person who can like hold a conversation pretty decently. But this guy, man, like he totally changed my view on things. And he's just killing it, right? He like was in cyber for like a year and a half. And then an organization was like, "We love your soft skills. We'll train you with everything else we need. We want you to come be like a high level manager at our organization with like a path up because you can just tell people like it is." And
Yeah.
I say all that to say like, and you come back to the back and forth of like, well, you can't tell this guy that he sucks because it's like that meme on Reddit, right? Like he's the stick that holds up the internet with this open source project.
It's kind of funny, like because you talk about Santosh and just got along with everybody, and it's interesting because when I started out, there was one of the directors had this guy. Like we had half permanent consultants, we had half independent contractors who would like work on our behalf, and the commercial arrangement there was whatever they wanted to work out with the company. And one of the directors was like, he had this guy that was like his pit bull. It was like rather than taking any, and he used to send him into his absolute war zones. It was financial services IT, but it was rather than sorting out the problem with a scalpel, it was like going in with a rusty machete, because this guy Manoj, everyone hated him. He was rude, he was abrasive, he was an asshole, but he was thrown in. He was successful at what he did, despite the fact that everyone hated him, precisely because everybody hated him. It was that he treated people in a way that made them hate him, and it was this. Oh, I don't care how many disagreements or differences of opinion that I have with you, we both have to work with this guy and fuck this guy. And he got things done because he would walk in, he'd smash people's heads together, he'd make them hate him, and then it'd go like they'd go siege mentality, and eventually it gets sorted out on the sheer basis of, like, I'm quite sure just on the sheer basis of the quicker we get this shit done, the quicker this guy pisses off.
This sounds like auditing.
It sounds like absolutely. Yeah.
I know a couple of guys who, you talk about industries that I was surprised by. I remember the first time I met an auditor, and I was working with a very, very large scale organization. I was doing an assessment. I show up to the room, and there's this guy sitting in the corner, and he doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't say anything. He's like, don't worry. And when I was like, hey, who's that guy? And Santosh turns around and he's like, hey, what's up, man? And he's like, hey, don't worry about me. I'm not here. Just proceed as normal. And I was like, okay. Eventually, This guy ends up introducing himself to us later in the day. And he's like, yeah, so I'm an auditor, but like, I'm just here to observe because I'm going to perform an audit next week. So like, I just want to build questions of things. Like, I'm starting to uncover things now, which railroaded my assessment, right? Because everybody hates auditors. But I started talking to this guy. I was like, hey, man, the Santosh special was like, dude, let's grab a coffee. Let's go get some steaks. Like, let's do whatever, right? Let's just talk. And this guy was like, yeah, I actually didn't have a background in IT. I never wanted to be an auditor. I came out with a business degree, and I just happened to be like a nice guy. And somebody was like, hey, have you ever thought about getting into like IT auditing or cybersecurity auditing? And he was like, dude, I have problems with my iPhone, And they were like, okay, well, we're going to teach you. And they brought him over. And eventually we developed a relationship with this guy after a couple days, where he would be like, hey, can you explain to me that thing that they just said? Like, what is that they're talking about? But he's like, do you know how much it sucks to come in and be like, your password complexity sucks. Your like minimum password requirements terrible. It doesn't meet corporate like guidelines. It doesn't meet whatever compliance guidelines. And then they start talking about how they meet it with this technology. And he's like, 5 things. We're talking about 5 things. Nothing else. Those words don't mean anything to me. And that blew my mind, right? Because this guy, I still like, because of Santosh, we like keep in contact with him like every now and then, because they made a mutual connection over hockey, right? And then it's like just keeping up with the dude, and the dude's like just skyrocketing in his career, but just has a business degree, as he would say, and he's just killing it in cybersecurity auditing, and people are like, wow, and it's kind of mind blowing, right? Like, some really smart people end up in this industry not knowing that they were going to end up in this industry. Like, it's not a goal for everybody. But yeah, there's a personality type. I mean, you think about like incident responders in organizations, and you look at the way a typical incident response is structured. You have a lot of like low level like grunts who are like in the weeds, like looking at boxes that have been popped, and they're like building these complex timelines looking like Charlie Day and the meme, the conspiracy meme, they're like smoking a cigarette, like trying to figure out what's happening. And those are the guys that never will talk to a customer, but those guys are going to be the dudes and the gals who tell you like, this is the vector of entry, like you're going to be ransomware in 3 days, like this is what those IOCs look like, right? and they have a person who used to be one of them probably, who's just really personable and is really good at making people feel calm, and they're the ones who are interfacing with the customer, right? Or like the victim. And they're like, hey, just so you know, what I'm about to say is scary, but this is what happened. Like, and that's it, right? And you just have to be like an intermediary, right? And I've been that guy who's like been an intermediary for a non-technology focused executive who was like, look, put this in terms of numbers for me. Like, what does the risk, quantify the risk to my organization for me? Because you tell me I have Telnet and that I've got Eternal Blue and that they popped my OWA server. Those words don't mean anything to me. Tell me my critical assets, my crown jewels, what is the status of them? Like, is my data gone? Is there a ransom? Talk to me in numbers, like things I understand. And so there's another like soft skills slash different perspective on things, right? Like I'm going through like trying to get an MBA right now because for me, like being strategically focused in my career right now, I do get into a lot of meetings where I'm like really depending on principals above me who are like, that this acronym means this. And I'm like, oh, cool. Like, because an auditor showed up and they started throwing acronyms at me and I was like, I'm going to Google this, right? Like, yeah. So it's just, it's interesting.
You got to meet people where they are. I mean,
yeah.
One, you know,
you've got to meet people where they are. And you go back to the point that you made earlier, right? About people who design things and they're like, the end user sucks. And you're like, the end user is the reason you have a job. Like, I can't tell you the amount of times I've realized I've met people who in organizations, you're like, I'm doing an assessment. I'm like, tell me what your crown jewels are. And they're like, well, it's this. And we're like, hey, you make widgets. Nothing in your crown jewel assessment talks about making widgets. Instead, you're talking to me about your mail server and you're talking to me about this. What does your organization make money with? Right? And people are like, well, I don't care. That guy, Jeff in engineering's a dirtbag and Sally in HR is a total ass. Like, cause she won't go on a date with me. Like, whatever it is, you're just like, wow, dude, like put your emotions aside, meet people where they're at and like understand what's important to everybody else. And guess what? Like people are going to notice, people are going to like you, and they're going to be like, hey, that like low level dude pays extra attention to me. Like we've all seen it, right? Like you've got an end user who really likes a specific person and they're always them and their department are always requesting this person. And they're like, hey, we really like this guy or gal. And then they like constantly talk about them at these high level meetings and people are like, hey, you're getting a lot of recognition. We're going to promote you because you must be doing something right. And that's the ideal way you'd handle it. And then you get someone who's upset because they're like, I closed twice as many tickets. What are you talking about? Like,
yeah, but you also create tickets for solving a small thing that somebody asked you to do that took literally a minute to do, just so that you could have a ticket to close and make your numbers look good. Because I've seen that happen.
And you also accidentally call the customer stupid because you forgot to mute your phone. Like,
like I
like,
can't stand
because you were having a bad day, right? Like, we've all seen it, and it's unfortunate.
I think it's funny that we talk about things like, you know, the soft skills piece and the meeting people where they are, being able to talk to them, recognizing at the end of the day, everybody else is a human being with their own life. That in of itself, it's funny that we talked about force multipliers before. That in of itself is a force multiplier. Like, it is a, you know, you can go much further. I mean, in any industry, but you know, we're talking cyber specifically, and it's absolutely no exception. You can go a hell of a long way further than your technical sort of ability or acumen might suggest if you're lacking in that department, simply by being good with people.
Yeah, I used to do a ton of on-site assessments, and I've had people tell me I was really weird for this, but I have this like process for like managing people in my head. And so before I'd come on an assessment, I usually had a list of contacts. I do like an OSINT equivalent on these people, LinkedIn profiles, social media, whatever it is, and just try to get an understanding of their roles and what they do. But also like maybe I can understand a couple of like small things about them. And then if I showed up and they were hostile because they're upset that their boss hired somebody to assess them, you make a bridge with whatever thing that they happen to be passionate about, right? Like I happen to know somebody who works for a company that manages an open source project you really are into. Like you might be interested in hearing about some of the things that this guy or gal has told me. And then they're like, oh, wow, you're not a total piece of crap after all. Like, sure, let me show you. Like, I can't tell you. The first time this actually worked for me, I was mind blown because the person literally said, I want to show you all the things that you're here to look at, but no one was going to show you first. And then I'll show you all the good stuff after that. And they spent 4 hours literally showing me the worst of the worst things. And I was like, oh my God. And they're like, the good news is it's done. The next 4 days you're going to have here are going to be like really great. And we've got like some killer stuff to show you, but this stuff is like, these are like, this is where we bury the bodies. Yep. And I was like, I didn't even know how to process it, dude. I went back to my room at the end of that night. I'm like jet lagged in some other country. And I'm just like, dude, I think I can just write my report off the bad stuff now. Like,
so somebody you didn't have to go looking for the skeleton. Somebody just says, here's the closet where we keep the dead bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's weird because you're like, oh, you just make these connections and then people reach out to you. And so I say I've got like this system for managing people, right? Like I'm kind of an introvert naturally. And so I keep like a list. I have like a contact card for people I meet. And if they give me their phone number, email or something, I have like a notes section and it's the same profile every time, like wife or significant other, kids, pets, significant events going on in their life with the year that it happened in. And then if I run into this person 5 or 6 years later because they happen to be at a new company I'm working at or something, and I go see the contact card, just like, hey, how is this going? Or how is that going? Like, and they're just like, oh, wow, like you care. And it's not, some people are like, well, you don't really care. You're writing it down. I'm like, no, I'm writing it down because I care. Like people matter, man. Like I can't tell you how nice it is when people are like, how's your significant other doing? Like, Omar and I were talking about this before we jumped on, right? We're talking about some family and medical issues I have going on, right? And so it's just like, it's nice when people see you as more than just like the cybersecurity guy or gal who shows up. Like, you've got problems in your life just like everybody else does. Man, I can talk about soft skills all day, unfortunately. No, it's a conversation my wife and I will just...
I want to highlight, and I'm going to steal your line here, Jose. I want to foot stomp something that you mentioned. It's because folks will say, hey, I'm an introvert. I'm not good with people. But you don't, and people can get in their heads about that, right? Hey, I'm not good with people, or I just don't view myself that way. But so long as you're good to people, you'll muddle your way through. And then eventually you'll have a Rolodex, right? A mile deep where you go, listen, I don't know how to do that, but I think I can call in a favor here. And as long as it's reciprocal, you know, it's funny. I just remember somebody helped me out with something yesterday and it was like a dire, quick thing. It had to do with you know, like non-technical stuff, right? More administrative things, but they were so clutch with me and they hopped on Teams. They didn't have to, they walked me through something, figured it out, saved the day. I literally told them, you need something from the InfoSec department, please reach out to me. Like, here is a token, here is your, like, because it was a day off, but I had to deal with something and they were the gateway for me being able to get back and hang out with my kid on my day off and also not get lit on fire by my wife, who's like, listen, you say you take these days off and then you sign on. I hate you. So it was the most clutch thing. All right. I was able to shoot back upstairs, have pancakes with my baby girl, and, you know, let's go putz around and, you know, walk around and stuff. But doing that, and that'll see your way through even like weird technical scrapes where you're just like, I can't make heads or tails of this. This stuff's nuts. But I think I might be able to ping somebody who might have some insight or who might know somebody and they might be inclined to tell me who to go to, like you said, to cut through all the layers of craziness and just get to the root of the problem on the first day.
I would say
so important.
You talk about being an introvert and like being good to people. It's like for me, it's like a tough thing, right? And like I tell stories like this because I think it's important for people to be like, oh, you know, like there's a place for me. Like I'm that guy too. You know, I can relate. And so like I showed up to like my first true like company. First time I'm meeting any of my coworkers at my new job this year. There's like a company offsite. I show up. I'm not the guy who everybody's like, we're hanging out here, who just shows up. Like, that's not me. That's not my personality. I've got to have a single guy. And that's like how I became such good friends with Santosh at my last company, because I would encourage you, if you're the extrovert in an organization or like trying to break in and you're at a networking event, find the quiet person and just be like, hey, how are you doing? Like, I was going to ditch a company dinner right when I ate. Like, I showed up, I didn't even get a table. I was standing up eating because I wanted to go back to my room because this was so weird to me. And some random dudes from a different region that don't even work in the work I do came up and they were like, what's your name? What do you do? And I'm like, oh, hey, I'm so and so, I do this. And they're like, cool, I'm this person, I'm this person. And then they introduced me to 10 people that they work with. And then I'm in like a 45-minute conversation, right? And it's like, wow, it was great, right? And these people were good to me. And I've got also a couple of people who, one of my favorite things about working at the company I work at is somebody's really good at something in your company, right? There's a chance somebody's probably really good at something and they probably just want to talk to you about it anyway. Right? Like, this probably isn't even my full-time job. Like, I want to talk about this thing.
Yep.
Oh,
So yeah, treating people good.
There's something the other day that I encountered where it was like people. I don't know. I think it was a Reddit post. It was something asking about like what etiquette for the gym and stuff like that, and there's a number of people responded. That massive dude who looks really, really scary and is absolutely jacked and looks like he spent his entire life in the gym probably is nowhere near as scary as he looks, especially if you ask him about the stuff that he's doing right now, like in the gym, because the reason that he is that jacked is that lifting weights is his hobby. People love talking about their hobbies. People like talking about themselves. Most people like talking about themselves. Or their kids, yeah, or something about them.
That's my weakness now, Robin. Like you want to get in my good graces now, and it's over, right? You say, "Hey, how's the kid?"
How's your baby girl?
That's what I'm saying. I'll help you out. Hard body.
3 hours later.
Yeah, and you'll have everything you need out of me, my department, people I know. I'll call in favors on your behalf, so long as like you're just affable enough, and you're not a prick, man. Like, it's like the work is hard enough. Just be nice.
There are, Omar actually put me on this before. This guy Chris Voss, right, who writes a book Never Split the Difference. Omar recommended it. I read it like that same week. I read it like 3 times now, right? But it's because I have like this weird obsession with like understanding people and like what gets people going. And so I used to, like, in college, my freshman and sophomore year, I did like competitive public speaking because I wanted an A, right? And they said, if you win, you don't have to do a single thing in the class. You'll get an A. You don't even have to show up. And so I did it and I won. And they were like, hey, would you be willing to compete at other colleges? And I was like, can I get more A's? And they were like, you can get more A's. And so Chris Voss, right?
What's in it for
me?
He
has like this thing. I have like a couple of things that I do that, like, if you know me, right, like, that I'm like very self-deprecating. And it's like, it's a weird thing. I don't know. It's like, it sometimes is how I feel. Sometimes it's not, right? But really what it is like, I remember the first time I heard Chris Voss say it, right? He was like, if you're about to ruin somebody's day, but there's no way around it, you're going to be like, I'm about to sound like a total asshole. I'm really sorry. And then you hit them with it because people brace themselves and you're like, oh, wow. Or like you practice active listening or just repeating things that other people say, because like mirroring with them. And you're like, oh, okay, like these things actually work, right? This guy is an expert negotiator. And that's not what I'm trying to do, right? I'm not trying to negotiate. But what I am trying to do is, part of negotiating is making people feel seen, right? And so part of that is, once again, I've had people, I recommend this to someone else and they're like, that's kind of fake of you, right? And I'm like, no one says it's fake of you if you take like a defensive driving class in the snow. Like, you just want to get better at something that you do every day.
You're a fake good driver. That's going to stick with me, Jose.
Yeah, dude.
You're a fake good driver. No, you alive. That's what matters, right?
It.
At the end of the day, you're alive.
That's it. And so it's just helping people. Like, I understand that you're frustrated. Like, that, ransomware sucks, or like being breached sucks. Like, here's what we can do, right? Here's what we can control. And then you're just like, I know a guy that I used to work with who actually gets really far with like basically having very similarly scripted responses to things, where he's like, I ask a lot of what's, I ask a lot of how's, I repeat a lot of what people say. And then he's like, by the end of my workday, the dude was like, I stare at a wall for an hour because I'm just mentally drained. My social battery is gone. But it works for me. People are like, they talk to me. I don't want them to, but they talk to me. Like,
it's I mean, it's because the Chris Voss is the FBI negotiator guy, right?
Yes.
yeah, that's him.
So so I watched a couple of his. I was on a plane and there was a few masterclass lessons on it, and one of them was like he's doing exactly that that you said before with like, you know, I understand that sounds frustrating, but it's the other, it's slightly tweaked. That sounds as though that was really frustrating, or you sound like you really like that, and it's him just saying a few, like some select phrases over again, and the other person just keeps talking and talking and talking, because, you know, part of his thing about, you know, from at least from an FBI negotiation perspective, like from hostage negotiation sort of stuff, it's like get as much information as you possibly can, because the more you get, the more you can kind of use for your position, but in a more like everyday, not being adversarial thing about it. It's just allowing people to open up.
I can't tell you how applicable that is to cybersecurity, like not just in like the assessments that I've done, but just general work. Like a company consultancy, right, has kind of been my bread and butter for over 3 years now. And so a company hires you to do X, right? Chances are this person didn't hire you, their boss did. And so you're like, hey, this is what we're going to do. And they're like, not budging. So you have lunch, you like have a conversation, you just get them talking. And then they're like, yeah, so-and-so, while we were doing this project, did this. And man, I remember when we were implementing this piece of software, like this sucked, man. Like this broke, like we couldn't get this working. And then the next day you're like, hey, dudes, you like have fun, you know, see you later. And then you come back and they're like, so let's talk about this one technology. And sometimes they don't even think about it. They're just like, oh yeah. And then they kind of just go down the rabbit hole. But it's just, I'm feeding you information that I'm not going to use against you, right? But like it's going to help me help you.
Yeah, and
sometimes people need some coaxing.
There was something else you said earlier about like there's the, you know, you go in and do an OSINT assessment, the open source intelligence, which, you know, for anyone who doesn't know is like, well, I'm just going to use what's freely out there. And it's like, yeah, exactly. And I've you know, I've done this kind of thing before. Some people reacted like, oh, that's funny, and some people seemed a bit like pissed off that you know, that docket of information had been found on. It's like, dude, you know, you left it out there, right? You left that stuff hanging around for anybody else to find. Don't be mad at me. But also, what, you think I'm dragging this stuff up so I can use it against you? Why would I give it to you, right? My motivation here is benevolent. I'm telling you where you're exposed so you can fix it. I'm on your side. And that's one of those things as well, where it's like, you know, I think people can sometimes be quick to jump to negative kind of attribution of other people's intent. You know, they're a different person. They're not you. They don't know what, or you don't know what they're thinking. So we just assume, oh, look, let's go defensive, and it's bad. It's not that. Most people are helpful. Or try to.
Yeah, I'll say there's a large group of people who like get really paranoid when they find out that like, oh, how do you know this much about me? I did this like series of assessments for an organization, and we had the same executive who would like constantly pop in and out to see how things were going, like travel along. And it got funny with him eventually. It was like I kind of opened up that I do this, and it became like a game at the end of an assessment. It'd be like, hey, tell so and so how much you know about them. And it would be like, no, it was really like awkward for me at first, right? But he'd be like, no, trust me, it's gonna be creepy, but I want you to find out, like, I want this guy to tell you everything he learned about you on the internet. And it was like, I was working with one guy, and I was like, yeah, I know you work here. I know that you have a sibling who happens to be a previous D1 athlete who also now works for the company. I know that, like, you know, insert a bunch of other random things about the organization, because I started making the connection between them and their sibling. And they were like, oh, congratulations to my sibling, right? This guy actually was not very popular, like on himself on the internet, but their sibling was like, my brother, my sister, blah, blah, blah. Look at this. And it was a lot of family information. I know you have dogs. It was just like, hey man, like I have 3 dogs, dude. Like that's important for me to know. Like,
Yeah, I
and
had a similar situation. It was the C-suite member of an investment bank back in Europe, and it was like he was locked down to hell, but with one exception, which was his friends list was ever so slightly like open. It was like not the whole thing, but a few of them were, so I could find his kids, and his kids were really like open. So I was like, oh well, now I know where you live, and it's not because you were careless. It's because it's because your kids were. But I'm just thinking now, like I would think if there's any Fortune 500 CEO, for example, who doesn't have any kind of an interest as to what someone could find out about his senior leadership team or her senior leadership team, that's a big problem. Like as a CEO or C-suite, you should know whether the people who work directly beneath you at that very senior level are exposed or not.
there are people who do that kind of work, right? And so I'm glad you mentioned that, right? Because I've always been a fan of like the like nasty political way. Like if you're thinking about doing something at a certain level, like they do like Oppo research on you, like what would the like adversary find about you? And I've always been a fan of doing that, right? Like unfortunately, let's look at the news right now, and you know the tragic murder of like a CEO over like
Mm-hmm.
you know however you feel about it, it doesn't matter. It's just like enough of this person's life was on the internet that somebody figured it out, and like a well-educated person, right? Like it sucks, man. Like I'm sorry, but like
Yeah,
this person didn't even live nearby you. There was enough on the internet about you. It's just
They
the
could
world's a scary
pinpoint
place.
where you'd be at a certain time and could set up on you. Like you're absolutely correct, and that's I think probably the biggest change in Jose, roughly same time in the game, the two of us here. I think that's probably one of the biggest shifts, at least for my perspective, where the logical or the cyber and the physical are really starting to blend in, right? As more tech permeates our daily lives. I think that's much more possible than it used to be, where you can pinpoint, especially if it's a major city, right? Especially if you live in a pretty big metro area, you can get placed very easily nowadays, more and more so. So it's one of those where it's no longer, well, I don't do a technical job, so all that cockamamie cybersecurity stuff don't apply to me. No, wait a second, right? You're on camera, right? Do you use a card? Like, what do you do? Do you have a phone? Right? Does that phone ping places? It's getting blurry as it goes on.
Can your phone be pickpocketed, and have we got a reasonable assumption as to what your passcode is? Because now we can get to your multi-factor authentication, and we can get into your corporate accounts, and we can start sending emails to finance and saying, can you please transfer $300,000 to X? Like, you know,
in Apple gift cards, right? That's always the thing.
in Apple gift cards.
Or here's a wire transfer to another country. There's kind of an interesting story. I met a really cool guy like at a hotel bar a couple months back, and
it's always hotel bars.
Yeah, dude, the guy was
interesting
nice.
People at hotel bars.
Dude, the guy was super nice. I would have never thought the work that he did was the work he did, but he was just such a nice, personable European man who was just in town on work, and we happened to previously work for a similar organization, so like I knew people who knew him. But the guy was like, yeah, he was into OSINT for fun, and so he gave me a bunch of like stories that you wouldn't even believe until he like pulls out his phone and he's like starts showing me stuff. He's like, do you know how the initial invasion on Ukraine was stopped? And I'm like, no. And he's like, Twitter. People were posting about random tanks coming into the country on Twitter. And so a bunch of dudes and dudettes got together and they found the tank line and they took out the first tank and they took out the last tank. And guess what? It was a single road. Nobody could go anywhere. And so he's like, I at some point decided that I wanted to help. So I started looking for stuff online and feeding it back, right? Like in my own personal time and like feeding into the machine. And so it's like all these conversations about open source intelligence and like, you know, like military intelligence wise, like I've met a lot of like intel operators who are like, a ton of the stuff that we're doing is just open source we're finding, and a bunch of the classified stuff you end up seeing is like an aggregate of so many open source things with like a single like cherry on top, and then you're like, oh, I've seen 90% of this before, right? And so you meet, you can like Google stuff like this. There are like entire organizations who like keep fake internet personas so that they can like follow adversaries online, and they can get an insight into like how ransomware organizations work, or like, hey, we got to see like them set up their infrastructure and the technology that they were using, right? Like, there's like this guy, I forget his name. He does like short videos of like, you show him like a picture and he like tells you exactly where it was taken.
Seen it.
Guys like that. I know,
it's
like
impressive.
Exactly, crazy. Dude, it's crazy. You talk about guys like TCM Security, right? Who have a ton of great content and like a good place to start, but they have like fun YouTube series where it's like, let's find a random influencer and let me tell you where they live based off of the architecture in their home. And the things that they record, or like their kitchen, and you're like, wow, this is crazy.
The OSINT course that Heath did, right? TCM Security. The one of the and I think it's freely available, so this is cool. You can go snap it up like tomorrow. But the capstone project that he walks you through is the robbery and eventual unfortunate murder of a rapper, of Pop Smoke. Right? Like the last few videos of his OSINT series are like the tragic last days of Pop Smoke, and he goes and shows, there was like the partial, he was liberal on social media about what he was doing. He showed that he had a lot of money. He showed the type of car he was driving, and in the back of one of the videos, of like a quick clip, there was the partial address on the side of the house. And then through all that, they were the robbers were eventually able to say, okay, he's going to be here, here, and here at this time. They went to rob him for that sack of money that he showed that he had on him for whatever reason, and then unfortunately it ended up him getting shot. And it drove home the point of the rest of the video series. Awesome stuff. The OSINT course was amazing. It drives home the point of how real and what the consequences can be if you stick your mind to it. In that vein,
a large part of assessments, right, is not just the OSINT on people, but like the OSINT on the organizations. And like the amount of information that you can take from people. People don't realize, like we talk about like war, right, and like what war is going to look like. You think about the initial attacks on Ukraine were like taking down critical infrastructure, and you look at stuff like Volt Typhoon, very open source, like attacks on water infrastructure in the United States, which is like held together by like duct tape and prayer, like spit. Like it's crazy, right? Like what municipal water companies and plants are held together by, and you're like, wow, like this is the water I'm drinking, or like this is why this matters to me. Right, man. I can't tell you how often I made the reference earlier to Charlie Day, right, in that conspiracy meme. I can't tell you how often I have a conversation with like friends or like my siblings' friends who aren't in the industry, and they start with one thing, and I've got like this how I can tell people like they should stay off social media type talk, right? It's this long conversation, and like they're like, why aren't you on social media? And I'm like, whoa, here's the rabbit hole. And they're like, wait a second, dude. Like I had one question, and now you make me want to put my phone in a microwave. And I'm like, you just learn to manage your risk. Like, you just have to accept.
My work here is done. Then my job is done. If that's what you want to do with your phone.
Yeah. So it's crazy, man. I don't know another way to put it.
I think that before we pivot to sort of closer that Omar wants to hit, I think especially with that critical infrastructure piece, I think very much more deliberate and short term what Russia was doing with Ukraine. But I think the stuff I've always looked at the things on, and it's slightly Charlie Day with it, all the attacks on US critical infrastructure, because it does tend to be at the town level or the county level. It's quite small. It's not something where it's like, the whole, aside from Colonial Pipeline, where the whole country ends up in a position of like, oh shit, what happened there? People tend to ignore those things an awful lot because they don't understand necessarily the long-term like ramifications, like the secondary, tertiary effects of if that happens enough and it happens to a sufficient kind of degree of severity, people start getting irate. They could be they start losing trust in the system, in the in the society that they exist, and they go like, well, why aren't these people competent? Why is everything falling down? Why are eggs so expensive? That kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, there's your secondary, tertiary effects. There's the long game that these people who are affiliated with foreign governments, this is what they're pitching at. And the problem is that at no point during the last 5-10 years or however long it may be, did you notice that that's what was going on?
Yeah. It's we could blame it on the news cycle, I think. And like, you think about, I always like to go back to the example. I'm like, I always ask people, do you remember net neutrality being in the news? And some people are like, no.
Yeah.
And some people are like, wow, I remember that being a thing. And I'm like, that was a very big deal for this much. And then it ended. And guess what? Nothing changed.
Mm-hmm.
The like Europe put in GDPR and people were like, we need to do this. So California like copies it kind of to like their own version. And then they're like, America needs to do this. And then like whatever government conspiracy like lobby thing happens, and then people suddenly forget that they want their data. Like, it's just, it's unfortunate.
Yeah,
And
it's unfortunate.
kind of piggybacking off of that, because I know, Jose, you're a busy guy, but I want to bridge this into what's going to be our kickoff show for 25. What's your hottest take, craziest prediction for the upcoming year in cyber? What would you say?
I would say this is a tough one, because like in the work I do, there's like a specific concern I have that I can't like necessarily voice.
Please don't.
Here's what I would say. Deep fakes are going to continue getting better. It's going to be the 2024 concerns I had are going to continue becoming more 2025 concerns. We talk about things like artificial intelligence being a force multiplier. It is a great tool that you can use to better yourself. But just like any tool you use to better yourself, like you can use a weapon to protect yourself, you can use a weapon to cause harm.
Sure.
And so I like to think about it in the same way. I think we're also kind of like in this cybersecurity paradox, right? Where people don't challenge the statement that more security will equal more safety, right? And so people are like, increase the tech stack, and you're like, no, I don't think we should. And some people are like, no. Like, I often will talk to organizations that we have 35 tools and we've implemented 5 of them, or something like that, right? It forces a hard look at the limitations on the current approaches and the need for like another buzzword, right? But like radical innovation. So like the things that were important to us before, like proactive cybersecurity, cyber threat hunting, and like building resilient cyber infrastructure as an organization, or like as a country, is going to be like an even bigger thing. And then you look at like sprinkling artificial intelligence with that, right? Like AI is going to become like, bring your own AI is like a problem, right? Like, I've got somebody I work with who like BYOD is like bring your own disaster. Like that's what BYO AI is going to be. People are barely learning how to pen test against LLMs. And they're becoming so prominent, and you can like now buy like $250 small computers from NVIDIA that can do like 10 trillion like processes per second and run their own LLMs. And they're going to be like, oh, cool. Like this company put out their chatbot. I'm going to see if I can get it to feed me information from the back end resources that it has. But yeah, I think this like cybersecurity paradox is going to be a big thing, right? Because people are scared. So people are going to buy things, and people are going to be like, these things don't protect me. What are you talking about? And then we're just going to end up in this like washing machine of cybersecurity issues.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a bad answer, but
no, I think
I get it.
It's a brilliant answer, and I think it shows systems level thinking, right? Where it's not all going to be linear. Like you have to sit there and go, where if I tweak this, where's the feedback coming? And is it always close in space and time? No, which is what makes a system so goddamn hard to decipher. but that's what it's going to take in order to make any true progress. And also the takeaway for me, at least, gentlemen, is going to be more security doesn't necessarily equal more safety. That's going to stick with me for a little
more
bit, man.
security
Thank you.
is not more safety is something I find myself saying more often than not. We're in this final like statement, right? Like the White House of the United States says you need more cybersecurity, put more money. ISC2 creates like certified in cybersecurity. Everyone wants to be cybersecurity. Cybersecurity influencers are here, make a ton of money. Everybody starts learning. Everybody's now discouraged that they can't get a job. Nobody wants to be in cybersecurity. We still have jobs that aren't filled.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you're like, wait a second.
Yep. You're absolutely
We
correct,
ended
man.
up where we started, sir. But now we just spent $100 million.
But like more tired. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just more tired than I was last week. Because I'm trying to keep up with what is important that ends up not being important. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Jose.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. We're excited to get this out to the public. I think they need to hear it. And welcome back anytime, man. If anything's burning off the top of your dome, give us a ping, and happy to have you back on.
If you ever want to talk big news, cybersecurity news, let me know.
I like it.
If there's anything that there's gonna be, there'll be big news. Yeah. Last year, this year just gone taught us that. Okay, cool, wonderful. Thank you very much for your time. This has been fantastic. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Cheers.
Right, welcome back. Thank you very much for joining us. We hope you really enjoyed that slightly longer news segment, but also more importantly that interview with Jose. Omar, what did you take from that? What do you think of it?
There's layers of an onion to every man, and I was just privileged to peel back a few more with somebody who I already considered a friend. And the more I see, the more I'm humbled that he is my friend. Thanks, Jose.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Jose. Yeah, really cool, affable guy. Hope we have him on again, and hopefully at some point between now and then, I will manage to get out of my head whenever I hear or think his name the line from Die Hard 3 where Jeremy Irons' character turns up to the Wall Street subway bomb site and goes, "Holy Toledo, somebody had fun." Because that's all I think is Jose Toledo, Holy Toledo. Oh damn it, Simon Gruber.
It's I mean, it's not the worst association. I'm sure he'd be fine with it.
Yes. Well, you know better than I do, but I mean, it's fairly. I can't see any reason why anybody would have any problem with that. Right. We do not have anything feature-wise on the docket for next week, so we will simply be back with just the news and more verbal trip overs from me that I end up not cutting out and editing because I can't be bothered.
They're endearing.
Some of them do end up just being a little bit too much. And actually, I think there's times when I will look through back on the editing and I'll hear some words that I'll look at and I'll go, I'm sure I said that the proper way, but there's like an E ends up being an A and it's like, that's not actually a word. It's very odd. It's weird. Anyway, enough of my rambling. We'll see you again next week. And till then, stay cyber safe.
Adios.